The term fake news is like using the N-word. I don't know exactly what he's doing, but that's obviously an egregious statement to make. When you are being parodied on Saturday Night Live, as CNN is, as being a baby in a cage at a press conference with Sean Spicer, clearly there's an optic problem between CNN and the president. It seems like they are doubling down on this rivalry and this war, which I would think is ill-advised, but it's certainly going to be fascinating to watch going forward.
That's exactly what's going on. I mean, the president keeps calling them out specifically as fake news. I mean, that they are the fake news. They're going to keep pushing back, and it just keeps escalating.
So is the president getting what he wants by putting CNN on the defensive? What about
it helps him with his base, because as long as it looks like you're going after the liberal media and these fake news journalists at CNN aren't giving you the good college try as president that you should because you're a Republican, it only helps his base. What it does for independent voters is nothing, but it really rabble-rouses the group of people that helped get him elected.
What about the larger media debate here about Trump and the judiciary and undermining judges, and of course the battle over this appellate ruling, which is not clear what the White House is going to do about that? So in the Washington Post, Chris Cillizza writes, major setback for his conception of a presidency with nearly unlimited power after the Ninth Circuit ruled.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to take anything Chris Cillizza says that seriously. But that being said, I love the Neil Gorsuch pick. I think he's exactly what, you know, supporters of Antonin Scalia would have wanted, and he's the rightful heir.
Well, but I want you to respond to Cillizza. Major setback because of the Ninth Circuit ruling against. Is it a major setback? Because it's an argument about a temporary restraining order.
I don't think it's a major setback, but that being said, what we discussed earlier on the show, I think he should quit tweeting in sort of the impulsive way that he is, because all the political capital that you got by making this great choice sort of goes out the window with these tweets.
Well, that's what he said. Chris Cillizza saying this helps Trump with his base. I mean, that some establishment figures in Washington are saying that it's a big setback. Are you kidding me? He's trying to do his ban, whether you want to call it a ban or not. The courts are stopping him. He goes after the so-called judges, the elites in Washington. Yeah. Hair goes on fire.
Spoken as a
in his base.
Spoken as a true political consultant. I want to move on to this other issue involving Michael Flynn. Very controversial story now after the Washington Post quoted 9 unnamed officials, senior officials, as saying that the National Security Advisor had discussed before Trump took office the question of U.S. sanctions with the Russian ambassador, which the sources, according to this story in the Post, view as inappropriate and potentially illegal. Let me play for you how some television anchors are treating this leaked story.
If this is proven that he did this, do you think he should be disciplined in any way? Should he leave the White House?
How do you read what's happening here with Mike Flynn? Is it a large enough deal that he should be asked by the president to step aside?
This is how a media drumbeat starts, where then every segment is tagged with or has a question about, should he resign? Could he resign? Why won't he resign? Is that what journalists should be doing?
If you ask a leading question, you're going to get a defensive answer. The question should be, what is the administration doing about this? What should the repercussions be? What should standards be going forward? And then you might get a little bit more in that interview. It only harms the interviewer by asking those leading questions.
Now, Megan, this is a serious story and a serious question. But the coordinated leak here, because of so many different sources, suggests that there are people in this administration who would like perhaps to push Michael Flynn out. And of course, what they're also trying to do is hurt President Trump.
Yeah, I mean, the White House has a leak problem from the top down starting for the last 3 weeks. This particular story, if you care at all about Russia and the administration's relationship with Vladimir Putin, this is an extremely serious story. There's allegations that he took money and that he made a phone call on Christmas Day and then lied to our vice president. These are very intense allegations. But if you make this partisan and this about they should step down, this administration is behaving in the wrong way, and you make this a Democrat versus Republican issue instead of about national security, that's where the media gets it wrong.
So you think the media are making it excessively partisan? Potentially.
I think when it looks like you are. Go ahead.
I just think this is a drip, drip, drip in which Flynn himself is sort of adding to the fire by suddenly can't recall, doesn't remember, maybe I did say
just to get it straight, initially Flynn told the Washington Post that conversation never happened, they didn't discuss it. Then the next day he said that he doesn't recall it, as you say, Joe, but doesn't think it came up. And of course, Vice President Pence defended him on national television, on Fox News Sunday, in fact, and elsewhere, based on Flynn's assurances.
Right. So what I'm saying is the way they've handled it, the way Flynn's handled this in terms of walking things back, I think is just flaming more questions. And you're going to have, look, there are partisans inside the White House who want to get rid of him. There are partisans outside. They're going to take advantage of this and flame the media And these, I think you're right, these leading questions.
You also had
just sort of putting more pressure on him.
You also had a leak to Reuters about how when President Trump was talking to Vladimir Putin and the New START treaty came up, he asked an aide, well, what is that? And the White House disputes that. But so many leaks from within the building or other buildings like the State Department.
They definitely have a leaking problem right now, which if I were working in the White House, I would be doing as much as possible to find out exactly whom it's coming from and why. All of that being said, this story is legitimate. My concern is everything having to do with Russia is spun by the White House and by President Trump as being, sort of part of the DNC conspiracy theory. And there are legitimate questions that people want answered. Absolutely legitimate story. The way it was being covered is something that we examine here. You can let us know what you think about the media. Media Buzz at foxnews.com. Ahead, Sarah Huckabee Sanders responds on behalf of the White House. But when we come back, a major media pushback against the president's charge of inadequate coverage of terror attacks. Does he have a point? There's been a media revolt against President Trump over his charge that news organizations aren't covering many terror attacks or aren't covering them enough. And that quote, as you saw earlier, they have their reasons. Meghan McCain, the network says we saw a pushback pretty hard on this. Trump says they're not covering him for a reason. What do you make of this back and forth? Yeah, I didn't understand this at all. And you need more evidence than just simply sending out a list of terror attacks that, in my opinion, were covered very well, especially extensively on this network. I also find it strange that your spokesperson, Kellyanne Conway, is going on TV and making up massacres at the same time. She took
that was
a
a mistake for which she
It was a mistake, but it's still being used in memes and protest signs all over the country. Sorry, continue.
I think you keep cutting her off. She gets to cut you
cutting
off.
Me off.
I think many journalists. I'm going to cut you off now. I think many journalists are personally offended by this. I'm going to give you a lot of time, Joe, because they've gotten on planes to cover the aftermath of some of these things.
Well, yeah, but that offense is worked for Trump again. I watched the news that day. They pushed back so hard. Let us show you all the times we covered.
And how does that help him?
I'm sitting there at home going like, man, that's a lot of attacks. I mean, in other words, it actually kind of, he's a win-win. If they all back off and say, yeah, you're right, we didn't, he wins. And if they come back and show a lot of the coverage that they did, they're making his point.
There was a kernel of a concept that was worthy of more discussion, that maybe we don't cover foreign policy and national security enough. Now, was he wrong in what he said? Yes. Did media organizations push back as they should have? Yes, but maybe we could have discussed it a little bit further. You recall in 2014, there were tons of ISIS beheadings, and then there was a discussion after that maybe we shouldn't give ISIS that much publicity.
But that's exactly the point I was going to bring up, Megan. The debate in media circles before this has been whether we give these attacks too much coverage, whether the press is playing into the terrorists' hands by making it the lead story for days and days. It's a hard dilemma to resolve, and here's the president saying they're not covering some of these attacks adequately, and they have their reasons. What do you think he was insinuating?
Well, the implication is that there are political reasons why the Obama administration somehow wasn't letting you know about terror attacks. But there's a thing called social media and the internet. Yes, and played it down. Again, if we're like taking reality and taking it a few steps further, I would assume that means just because the Obama administration was saying everything's going amazing in Iraq and Afghanistan, ISIS has not metastasized, it hasn't grown, and he was trying to say they were covering in that way. All of this is really clumsy narrative. I mean, you know this very well. I just wish they could keep this concise and tight instead of trying to, read the tea leaves of exactly the kernel of truth, as you said, they're trying to say.
But I agree with Aaron. There was a missed opportunity to actually have a discussion about how we cover this, and instead it was just sort of defensive and going right back on the attack against something the president
The White House
said.
list of 78 attacks included some that there were no casualties and some that we hadn't heard of because they were, look, we obviously cover attacks far more intensively when they're on foreign soil and they're not in a place like Britain or France. But they also included Orlando, San Bernardino, Paris, Nice, which got saturation coverage.
Oh, there are a lot of people who would argue, and I'd be one of them, that on some of them we just covered them so much and put so much fear out there. And that's the argument, I think, that when we
Just if I can inject one last note here in the time we have left. President Trump also this week talked about how the murder rate in our country is the highest it's been in 47 years. Actually, it's near a half-century low. The next day he used a different statistic about the increase, which was accurate. So there seems to be a constant, and we talked about this a little bit with CNN, well, the president was wrong about this, the president was wrong about that. CBS's Scott Pelley says, divorced from reality in the lead of his newscast.
Look, they do need to get their facts straight, and President Trump should make that a a goal of his for the year 2017 to start putting out accurate statistics. I do think back on the terrorism thing, though, I would like to ask him, what is it that you think the American public is missing? Not just what is the media not covering. What do you want to tell us about terrorism that you've learned since taking office?
Well, you're at the White House every day now. You can ask that question. Aaron McPack, we'll see you later. Meghan McCain, Joe Trippi, thanks for stopping by this Sunday. Ahead, how the media are treating Elizabeth Warren as opposed to, say, Sean Spicer. But up next, a media furor over the president whacking Nordstrom for dropping his daughter's clothing line. Trish Regan is on deck. When Nordstrom announced it was dropping Ivanka Trump's clothing line, the company touched off a major controversy and a presidential response on Twitter. Quote, "My daughter Ivanka has been treated so unfairly by @Nordstrom. She's a great person, always pushing me to do the right thing. Terrible." And then there's another one in which the president says Ivanka is being abused and treated so badly by the media. I spoke about the coverage with Trish Regan, who hosts the Intel Report on Fox Business weekdays at 2 Eastern. Trish Regan, welcome.
Hi, Howie.
So Nordstrom says Ivanka Trump's clothing line just isn't selling that well, so we decided to drop it 2 weeks into the administration. Are you buying that?
Not entirely, no. I think that there's a lot of politics at play here, and we're seeing it over and over again, increasingly so in businesses, and it's a little disturbing, Howie. I think what really was going on here is that Nordstrom's didn't like getting the shock effect of all the people that don't like Trump going after them on Twitter, and so this is their response. This is how they're dealing with it.
Right. So let me ask you, the president, as everyone now knows, decides to put up a tweet criticizing Nordstrom's decision on the grounds, and the press just really pounces on this on the grounds that he's trying to help his daughter's business. Your take?
I think, let's not forget, this man is a father, and his daughter's been slighted, and you've got daughters, I've got daughters. I mean, as a parent, part of what you would always do is stick up for your child. So I think that there's a whole lot more at play here, and this is in part just a dad being a dad.
Right, but the argument is it's not just a dad being a dad because he's the president of the United States and he is targeting a specific corporation. That's the argument, at least, that I see in a lot of the stories.
Yeah, and people have gone after him for targeting a lot of different corporations. For for example, going after the F-35 program, saying we need to change this and we need to. He has done that, and he's got certainly a bully pulpit, if you would, that makes it a little nerve-wracking for businesses. And I guess Nordstrom now is seeing his wrath. And I hear you. There's some criticism that perhaps he shouldn't have done this, but I think this may have been just somewhat of an emotional response. And when someone goes after your child, Howie, you go back at them, even if you're the president of the United States.
I can understand that part. Now, Kellyanne Conway, as you know, got in a bit of hot water when she went on Fox and Friends and said this.
Go buy Ivanka's stuff is what I would tell. I'm gonna get. I hate shopping. I'm gonna go get some on myself today. I'm gonna give a free commercial here. Go buy it today, everybody. You can find it online.
Sean Spicer later said that Kellyanne Conway had